October 9th, 298 AC, by the Westerosi calendar. The twins. Music plays, wine flows, and the hall is packed with Northerners and Walder Frey's men. The doors are closing. The event that will go down in history as the Red Wedding is about to begin. But what if those doors never closed? What if someone had arrived in time? What if Walder Frey had faltered? Or the conspiracy had been uncovered an hour before it started? Or an arrow had missed its mark? Robb Stark walks out of the twins alive. The king in the north lives. It might seem like a victory, but today we're going to break down why it's no victory at all. Because the problems that drove Robb into the trap at the twins haven't gone anywhere. They've just been given more time to destroy him. In canon, by the time of the Red Wedding, Robb's army is no longer the force that began the war. 18,000 soldiers marched from the north when he crossed the Frey's fords 2 years ago. Now he has less than half that. Roose Bolton intentionally threw away about 5,000 men in 2 battles at Duskendale and the Ruby Ford. 3,000 died in one, 2,000 in the other. The Karstarks are gone. The Freys left even earlier, immediately after news of Robb's marriage to Jane Westerling. In total, Robb brings 3,500 men to the twins, less than 4,000. Against him, including the Bolton troops and Frey troops, are more than 10,000, already arrayed in battle positions. Furthermore, Theon took Winterfell, and then the Ironborn burned it to the ground. Bran and Rickon are either dead or wandering somewhere. Cersei holds Sansa in King's Landing. Jaime Lannister, whom Catelyn released in exchange for a promise to return her daughters, is already halfway home, missing a hand. The deal failed before Catelyn even had time to regret it. Robb has lost half his army, lost his home, and lost part of his family. The only thing he has left is his reputation as a commander who hasn't lost a single battle. And this is where the most interesting question begins. What if he were given another chance? What would he do with it? To understand this, we first need to establish one thing, the point of our divergence. We aren't changing the entire chain of events, just one specific moment. Either Walder Frey loses his nerve, the conspiracy is uncovered a few hours before it begins, or Roose Bolton, for some reason, refuses to participate. It doesn't matter how exactly, the result is what counts. Robb Stark walks out of the twins alive, along with his mother, along with those 3,500 soldiers he brought. And now, let's see what happens next, because the consequences will surprise you. The first few days after the aborted Red Wedding give Robb something he hasn't had in a long time, a reprieve and a powerful political argument. Walder Frey did not kill his guest. It's not a heroic feat, it's the bare minimum of courtesy by the standards of the ancient law of guest right. But politically, it means the formal alliance between the North and the Riverlands has held. Edmure Tully is married to Rosalind Frey. The twins remain allies, albeit cold ones. The garrison at Riverrun holds. The old Blackfish, Brynden Tully, does not surrender. This means Robb still controls the crossings of the Trident. But here is what happens next. Roose Bolton knows his betrayal was either uncovered or is about to be. He has, at most, a few hours to make a decision. And here, his character says it all. Remember how the book version of Roose Bolton acted throughout the war? He never acted openly, always shielding himself with layers of plausible deniability. He is neither a coward nor a madman. He is a man who knows how to calculate the odds. If the conspiracy is uncovered before it begins, he has only one way out: pretend it never existed. Stand by Robb, do him a favor, and earn his trust once more. Postpone the betrayal. Wait for another moment. This is exactly what makes the situation truly dangerous. Because the threat hasn't disappeared. It has simply retreated into the shadows. Roose Bolton is still in Robb's army, still one of his chief commanders, and still sitting at the same table during war councils. And now he knows he was once on the verge of being exposed. He will become more cautious. He will become more patient. He wait. But this isn't the only problem awaiting Robb from day one. Because Tywin Lannister is also drawing conclusions, and his conclusions are far more dangerous. In King's Landing, as soon as word arrives that the wedding at the Twins went peacefully, Tywin Lannister realizes his plan has failed. Not just failed, but left traces. Roose Bolton is alive, Walder Frey is alive, but neither of them fulfilled the task for which they were promised rewards. Bolton was supposed to become Warden of the North. Frey was supposed to receive Riverrun. Neither happened. This isn't just a failed plan, it's an open sign of weakness. Tywin made a deal that didn't go through. He paid up front and didn't receive the goods. What does Tywin do when his plan fails? Exactly this. He builds a new one. Quickly, without panic, without complaints. He immediately begins looking for another way to neutralize the northern threat. The Tyrells are already allies, the Blackwater has been won, and Marjorie is betrothed to Joffrey. This means the forces of the Reach are at his disposal. Littlefinger is secretly working on several parallel intrigues, one of which concerns Lysa Arryn. Tywin thinks broader than just one wedding at one castle. He is thinking about how to surround Robb Stark, cut him off from the Riverlands, and let hunger and winter do what the Freys failed to do. And here, we must say aloud what is usually left unsaid. Roose Bolton, having already secretly contacted the Lannisters before the aborted Red Wedding, now becomes Tywin's most valuable asset right inside Robb's headquarters, a spy at the level of a chief commander. This is almost more important than an open betrayal at the Twins, because now Tywin will know every one of Robb's plans before he can even implement them. So Robb survived, but the trap around him has become more sophisticated. Let's see what he does next. Robb Stark was the only commander of the War of the Five Kings who didn't lose a single field battle, not one. The Whispering Wood, the Golden Tooth, Oxcross, Ashmark, one victory after another. Whenever it came to an open fight, he won. This isn't a coincidence, it's a system. He thought fast, moved fast, and used his direwolf and scouts like no one else in Westeros at the time. If you give Robb an army and put an enemy in front of him on the battlefield, he will preserve that army and destroy the enemy. In 2 years of war, he didn't suffer a single defeat in open combat, not once. Tywin himself admitted this to his inner circle, though he never said it aloud. The problem is that real war isn't just the battlefield. So, what does Robb have in our version after the aborted Red Wedding? 3,500 soldiers at the Twins, plus about 2,000 under the command of Brynden Tully at Riverrun. That's about 5,000 to 6,000 of the best Northerners. An alliance with the Freys, albeit a frosty one. Control over the crossings of the Trident, and the plan Robb was developing just before the Red Wedding to take Casterly Rock. It was a bold plan, perhaps even brilliant. Casterly Rock isn't just a castle, it's a symbol of Lannister power, their gold mines, their ancestral seat. To capture it would be to strike a blow at Tywin from which he would not psychologically recover. It would give all the neutral lords a reason to rethink their bets. The Tyrells, the Dornishmen, those who are still waiting, they are all watching the map closely. If Casterly Rock falls, the map will change. But here is what's important to understand. Taking Casterly Rock in our version is still possible. Holding it is almost impossible. Because the Lannisters have something Robb doesn't, and that is the very thing that will ultimately decide everything. Remember one word: provisions, food, grain, livestock. This is what will kill the king in the north faster than any sword. We will break this down in detail, but first, let's look at what actually happens when Robb moves west. Robb leads his army into the Westerlands. It's a smart move because Tywin doesn't expect it. He is waiting for a strike from the north or an attempt to break through to King's Landing. Instead, Robb bypasses the Golden Tooth through the woods with the help of Grey Wind, just as he did before, and finds himself in the heart of the Westerlands before Tywin can move reinforcements. For the first few weeks, everything goes well. Scouts move ahead, castles surrender one by one. Casterly Rock, of course, doesn't surrender, but the demoralization of the Lannister bannermen is obvious. Panic begins in Tywin's headquarters. The gold mines that Greyjoy captured a year ago still haven't been returned, another blow to their income. And now, let's look at what is happening simultaneously. While Robb moves west, Roose Bolton reports every step he takes to Tywin, every crossing, every halt, every change of route. This isn't a theory. The books explicitly describe how Bolton, during the war, systematically weakened Robb's army from within, sending his infantry into battles they couldn't survive. Duskendale, the Ruby Ford. 5,000 men killed not by the enemy, but by their own traitor through deliberately losing orders. In our version, Bolton continues to do the same, only more cautiously now. Tywin receives the rout. Tywin sets up several ambushes, not in one place, but in 3. If Robb escapes one, he will run into another. Here, we need to pause and be honest. Field ambushes against Robb Stark are no guarantee of success. He already escaped an ambush once that the entire Golden Tooth was built to spring. Perhaps he will escape again. Perhaps Grey Wind will sniff out the trap. Perhaps not. But one thing is certain, every maneuver costs Robb time, and time is the one thing he has the least of, because winter is already beginning. Here is the most important fact that most viewers don't consider. In canon, the War of the Five Kings unfolds at the end of summer, spills over into autumn, and begins to see the first frosts of winter. The North is not the Westerlands or the Reach. The Northerners cannot forage off the enemy's land because the enemy's land isn't what they are used to. They can pillage, they can seize livestock, they can empty granaries. But in the Westerlands, after Tywin prudently removed or burned most of the supplies during his retreat, there is nothing left to pillage. And the coming winter is not a metaphor. It is the physical destruction of an army that has no secure rear. In the book, Robb explicitly speaks the words that explain everything about his situation. He says to Catelyn, quite literally, "I have won every battle, and yet I am losing the war." This is not a complaint. It is an accurate diagnosis. Victories on the battlefield do not translate into victory in the war because Robb lacks a resource advantage. The Lannisters are wealthier. They have more reserves. They are sitting in King's Landing, which is difficult to besiege. The Tyrells, with their vast grain stores, have just become their allies after the Blackwater. Cargo ships are sailing from Seaguard to King's Landing, and Robb cannot cut this supply chain because he has no fleet. Now add to this another factor that is of critical importance in our version, the Ironborn. Balon Greyjoy declared himself king of the Iron Islands and attacked the north. This happened even before the Red Wedding, and in our version, this will not change. The Ironborn have taken Deepwood Motte, Moat Cailin, and several fortresses on the western coast. They are holding them right now while Robb is fighting in the south. What does this mean in practical terms? That the north is under threat from 2 sides simultaneously. That some lords are already thinking not of King's Landing, but of their own castles. That individual banners are beginning to head north without permission. Here is the tally of changes up to this point. Robb is alive. The Karstarks have left. Roose Bolton is in the army but working for Tywin. The Ironborn hold the western north. Supplies are running out. Winter has begun. Tywin knows every move. These are the consequences of one failed betrayal, and we haven't even reached the most interesting part yet. It would seem that Tywin is now in a worse position than in the canon. The Red Wedding did not take place. The northern threat has not been eliminated. Roose Bolton did not receive the wardenship. Walder Frey did not receive Riverrun. The Lannisters spent political capital on a deal that yielded no results. And here it is important to pause and understand something about Tywin Lannister. He is smarter than most viewers give him credit for. He never put all his eggs in one basket. What does Tywin do in our version? First, he offers Robb a truce. Not because he wants peace, but because a truce is advantageous to him at this moment. The Lannister troops are tired from a 2-year war. Renly's death removed the threat from the south for Tywin, but the alliance with the Tyrells required concessions. Discontent is brewing within King's Landing. Joffrey is unpredictable. Tyrion has effectively been pushed out of power. Tywin wants a year or a year and a half of peace to consolidate, rebuild his army, and finish what he started from a position of absolute superiority. Furthermore, it is precisely now that rumors about Daenerys are reaching King's Landing. The Maesters laugh. Joffrey laughs. Cersei says these are fairy tales for the small folk. Tywin does not laugh. Tywin reads the reports from Varys and merchants from Braavos. Tywin understands that if even half of what is being said is true, he has at best 3 to 4 years before something arrives from across the narrow sea that no army can handle without special preparation. This means the northern threat must be closed immediately, while still preserving resources for the other, far more serious threat. The terms of the truce he proposes sound formally reasonable. Independence for the North and the Riverlands as vassal kingdoms that are not part of the Seven Kingdoms but pay an annual tribute. The Stark family remains where they are. Sansa in King's Landing as a Lady Lannister. Arya is lost somewhere, and no one has found her, which in itself is a problem for Tywin. No military claims. Tywin, says Tywin, is prepared to forgive. He knows how to be a magnanimous victor when it is profitable. What does Robb do with this offer? And here we arrive at the most painful moment of this entire analysis. Because Robb must agree. He doesn't want to. He doesn't think it's right. He hasn't forgiven the murder of his father. He hasn't forgotten that Sansa is a captive. But he must, because his army will not survive another winter in the field without reliable supplies. Because the North is burning from the West. Because the loss of Winterfell is a psychological blow that is slowly destroying the morale of his banners. Robb knows all of this. His military genius lies, among other things, in his ability to count resources. He sees the numbers, and the numbers tell him exactly what he does not want to hear. But agreeing to Tywin's terms is not the end of the war. It is the beginning of another war, a hidden one. Because Littlefinger is already weaving another web, and it will tighten around Robb from the side he least expects. While all this is happening in Westeros, on the other side of the world, 3 dragons are growing. In 298 AC, Daenerys Targaryen takes Astapor, frees the Unsullied, and moves on Yunkai. She is 2 seas away from Westeros. Her dragons are still young. Her army is huge, but there is no fleet, no allies in Westeros, no understanding of what is happening in the homeland of her ancestors. This is the key to our version of the story. In the canon, the Red Wedding kills the king in the north at a time when Daenerys is still far away. By the time she reaches Westeros, the northern threat has long been eliminated. Jon Snow already knows of her existence, and everything unfolds in a specific political configuration. In our version, this configuration does not exist. When Daenerys finally becomes strong enough in Essos in 299 or 300 AC to consider crossing, she will discover something unexpected. There is still a war going on in the north of Westeros. The king in the north lives. The throne is occupied by the Lannisters, but their power is being contested. This creates a fundamentally different situation for Daenerys. In the canon, she arrives in a fractured world that is nonetheless controlled by the Lannisters. In our version, she arrives in a world where there is a living, recognized North with a rightful king who has a reputation for winning every battle. This is a potential ally. And here begins the question that I personally consider the most interesting in this entire thought experiment. Will an alliance between Robb and Daenerys be possible, or will they clash? Let's look at the motivations. Daenerys wants the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne is in King's Landing. Robb wants independence for the North and justice for his father. Formally, their interests do not contradict each other. Daenerys takes the South, Robb keeps the North for himself. But here is the key problem. Robb betrothed his uncle Edmure to a Frey, which means he maintains obligations to people Daenerys cares about the least. And Daenerys will bring Dothraki and Unsullied with her. That is, foreign armies. The North will take this poorly. Northmen remember what outsiders mean on their land. Negotiations will require a mediator. And here, Varys, who by that time already holds his position, perhaps becomes that mediator. But Littlefinger is working against any stable alliance. He needs chaos. Littlefinger always needs chaos. Now let's talk about what is happening at the Wall while all this is unfolding in the South. Because the White Walkers are not waiting for humans to finish their wars. In the canon, the Great Ranging of the Night's Watch goes beyond the Wall in 298 AC and encounters the others at the Fist of the First Men. It is a catastrophe. The Watch loses hundreds of men. The survivors flee to Castle Black. In our version, all of this happens exactly the same way because our point of divergence concerns the twins, not the Wall. But here is the critical difference. In the canon, after the Red Wedding, the Northern Lords are partially demoralized, partially killed, and the Night's Watch is left without support from the South. Jon Snow becomes Lord Commander, Stannis arrives and saves the Wall. All of this is a chain of specific events. In our version, Robb is alive. This means that when news reaches him of the attack by the others and the rout at the Fist of the First Men, he, as king in the North, is obligated to react. Not because he wants to, but because he has heard the words of his house his entire life. Winter is coming. In winter, one must stand guard at the Wall. This creates a third war for Robb simultaneously. He already has a war with the Lannisters in the south, a war with the Ironborn in the west. Now, a threat appears from the north that knows neither truces, nor political negotiations, nor terms of surrender. It is precisely here that Robb's strategic genius ceases to be enough, because you cannot fight on 3 fronts at the same time with an army of 6,000 men that has no grain for the winter and a traitor in its headquarters. In the canon, Mormont explained to Jon back at the beginning of the saga, the war in the south does not matter, only the others matter. In our version, Robb finds himself in the position of a man who knows this in his mind but lacks the resources to act accordingly. He faces a choice that has no right answer. Retreat to the north and abandon the Riverlands? Lose his allies. Stay in the south and ignore the others? Lose the north. Agree to a truce with Tywin and ask for help? That means admitting defeat while Ned Stark is still alive, the very same Ned Stark whom this very Tywin beheaded. This is a true dead end. And it is precisely these kinds of dead ends that George R.R. Martin builds better than anyone else. Let's now put the whole picture together. What happens in our version a year or a year and a half after the failed Red Wedding? Robb Stark is alive, but his army is slowly melting away. Not from battles, but from desertion, disease, hunger, and the splintering of his banners. The lords who see that a truce with the Lannisters is not coming and that winter is arriving in earnest begin to think about their own castles and their own supplies. This is not cowardice. This is survival. Lord Glover must think about Deepwood Motte. Lord Manderley must think about White Harbor. Each of them swore an oath to the king in the north. But when supplies run out, oaths begin to fade. Roose Bolton is still in the army and is still passing on information. At some point, Robb senses this. Perhaps he cannot prove it, but he senses it. He is too good a commander not to notice that his maneuvers are being unraveled faster than he can plan them. What happens next? Either he accuses Bolton directly, without proof, and loses several banners that Bolton has managed to attach to himself, or he stays silent and loses the initiative in every subsequent campaign. There is no good way out. Tywin, meanwhile, is consolidating. After the truce, or even before it, he transfers part of the Tyrell grain supplies to King's Landing, strengthens the walls, and negotiates a new loan with the Iron Bank of Bravos. He does what he has always done. He works not with a sword, but with gold and patience. His only real problem is Joffrey, who is unpredictable and could at any moment do something that messes up all his plans. That is precisely why Tywin begins to think about accelerating things. He needs Robb dead before the dragons come, because he has already heard, everyone has heard, even in King's Landing, a young queen in the east with dragons. And it is at this very moment that Tywin does something he didn't have to do in the canon. He openly offers Robb a deal, not through Bolton and not through secret letters, openly, via ravens, a 20-year truce, recognition of the independence of the North and the Riverlands, the return of Sansa, everything Robb wanted from the very beginning, in exchange for one thing. Robb must recognize Joffrey as king of the Seven Kingdoms and pledge not to enter into an alliance with any claimant to the Iron Throne, including the Targaryens, including Daenerys. It's a trap. A beautiful, reasonable, almost fair trap, because Tywin knows if Robb agrees, he will cut Daenerys off from her only potential northern ally. If Robb refuses, Tywin gains a moral argument for a new war. See, we offered peace and they refused. What happens to Robb in the end? This is the most difficult question of the entire scenario. The honest answer is this. He either agrees to Tywin's terms and secures the North at the cost of isolation and a slow fading away, or he refuses and continues the war until total exhaustion. In both cases, he never reaches King's Landing, not because he is a poor commander, but because the task is fundamentally unsolvable with the resources he has. The title of this video asks, would Robb have reached King's Landing? My answer is this. He could have taken Casterly Rock. That was within his power. He could have remained king in the north for a few years longer. That was also within his power. But take King's Landing? No, because King's Landing cannot be taken without a fleet, without allies within Westeros or from the south, and without the ability to feed an army under siege. Robb has none of the three. He understands this. He says it out loud himself. I have won every battle, but I am losing the war. Now let's compare this to the canon. In the canon, the Red Wedding ends in seconds. Death, silence, curtain. In our version, Robb lives for another year or two, a longer, more agonizing, slower end, without the betrayal in the banquet hall, but with betrayal in the command tent. Without the phrase arrows, but with hunger and desertion. Without one night of slaughter, but with the gradual depletion of what began as the most promising northern campaign in a generation. There is no sudden strike. There is only a long fading away. And that, perhaps, is even more terrifying. Why did Martin write the Red Wedding specifically? Why not a long siege, a gradual defeat, or a betrayal after 2 years of war? Martin himself answered this question. He said, I killed Ned because everyone expected the hero to survive. Then I killed Robb because everyone expected the hero's son to avenge his father. Both deaths are blows to narrative expectations. The reader arrives with one map in their head, and Martin flips the table. But there is also a deeper, authorial meaning. The Red Wedding is not just the death of a character. It is a statement about the nature of war in his world. That honor and martial prowess do not protect against poison in the wine or a crossbow at one's back. That the most brilliant commander can lose not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table, in bed with the wrong wife, or in the moment he lowers his shield. The Red Wedding is the thesis of the entire saga in concentrated form. The rules you think the game is played by are not the real rules. The real rules are hidden, and you only learn them when you have already lost. Martin was inspired by real history. The Red Wedding is the Black Dinner, which took place in Scotland in 1440. The young Earl of Douglas and his brother were invited to dinner by King James II with guarantees of safety and were murdered right at the table. There is another parallel, the massacre of Glencoe in 1692, when a company of soldiers spent more than 2 weeks quartered with the MacDonald clan, enjoying their hospitality, and then, on the king's orders, slaughtered their hosts under the cover of night. The law of guest right in Westeros, the violation of which makes the phrase cursed in the eyes of the entire North, is a direct analog to the Highland Code of Honor, where a host is responsible for a guest's life with his own. This is important for understanding our alternative version. If the phrase "do not violate guest right," they retain the reputation. But this also means that their reputation is henceforth worthless in another sense. Everyone in Westeros knows they almost went through with it. Rumors spread. Plans are not kept secret forever. Walder Frey, even if the Red Wedding did not take place, remains a man who thought about it. His word is devalued. His position in the Riverlands is weakened. This is not a theory. This is the logic of the world. If Martin's alternative history teaches us anything, it is not that Robb would have been saved. It is that it was already too late before the doors closed. The real Red Wedding happened long before the feast at the Twins. It happened the moment Robb fell in love with Jane Westerling and broke his promise to the Freys. It happened the moment Theon asked his father for help and received betrayal. It happened the moment Catelyn released Jaime Lannister and the Karstarks rebelled. It happened even earlier when Robb decided to march south instead of fortifying the north, when Ned went to King's Landing, when the entire House Stark began playing the game by someone else's rules. Each of these decisions is a small brick in the wall that surrounded Robb. Canceling the Red Wedding means removing the last brick. The wall hasn't gone anywhere. Here is the final picture of our Westeros. 2 years after the aborted Red Wedding, Robb Stark is alive, but his army is half the size it was a year ago. Daenerys Targaryen is moving toward the Narrow Sea with 3 grown dragons and an army of 80,000. The others are moving south, and the first villages beyond the wall are already empty. Tywin Lannister sits in King's Landing, waiting for his opponents to finish destroying themselves. Littlefinger holds the veil and weaves his webs. Stannis is still claiming the throne. Roose Bolton still wears the mask of an ally. The Iron Throne is still held by the Lannisters. Winter has truly begun. And from somewhere in the north, in a swirling snowstorm, comes that which no army can save you from, an army that has nothing to eat and is commanded by a man with a knife at his back. There is one version of this story that exists only as a theory, but which I cannot help but mention. Some book analysts believe that Martin scattered hints throughout the text that the Red Wedding could have been prevented. That Roose Bolton gave Robb signs of his disloyalty several times, in the pauses, in the advice that sounded reasonable but led to the weakening of the army. That the Black Fish, Brynden Tully, was against marching to the Twins and said so directly. This is not just retrospective armchair quarterbacking. This is what the book places before the reader, waiting for the reader to notice. If the theory is correct and the signs were there, it adds another tragic layer to Robb. He could have saved himself. Not because someone betrayed him or fate was cruel to him, but because he himself, time after time, chose honor and directness where a cold head was needed. He executed Karstark because the law demanded it. He married Jane because violating her honor would have been wrong. He went to the twins because the breach of the contract with the Freys had to be corrected in person. Each of these decisions can be defended individually. Together, they built a chain that led him into a room with locked doors. This makes Robb a tragic figure in the strictest sense of the word. Not a victim, but the hero of his own demise. A man whose best qualities turned out to be his greatest vulnerabilities. In this sense, an aborted red wedding would have changed nothing. It would have simply given him a little more time to make an honest choice again where calculation was needed, and then pay for it. The paradox of Robb Stark is that he was exactly the king the North needed. Not Westeros, not all 7 kingdoms, the North. He understood his people, respected their traditions, and fought for a just cause with an army he loved and that loved him in return. No other claimant in the War of the Five Kings could boast the same. Renly, who bought his army with numbers and gold, Stannis, who viewed the kingdom as a logistical problem, Joffrey, who was just a cruel boy with a crown. Robb was real. He was the kind of man songs are written about, and that is exactly what made his defeat inevitable in a world where the real ones are killed first. If the doors of the twins hadn't closed, what would have changed? The short answer, very little. The long answer, exactly what we have been talking about for half an hour. A different path, slower and no less bitter. A different way to arrive at the same point, where the North is alone. The Lannisters are consolidated, Daenerys is approaching, and the others are already at the wall. Only without one night at the twins, but with 2 years of slow depletion. This is what remains in your head after this breakdown. The Red Wedding is not the murder of Robb Stark. It is simply the moment when everything that had already been done to him long before that night finally spilled over. The doors of the twins closed, but the locks on those doors were hung much earlier.